Leviticus 19. Again, I just want to start by again pointing out there's covenant language right at the start of this section. You must be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Israel was to be a unique people in the way they lived because they were reflecting a holy God. Unique in reflecting a God who was unique, distinct, separate from evil, and they're called to do this by living a lifestyle that itself was separate from evil. And unfortunately, that's all too distinct. Right? Doing what is right makes you stand out, unfortunately, at times. And I say unfortunately, not because the standing out for doing what's right is unfortunate. It's just unfortunate that doing what's right stands out. Now, chapter 18, yesterday, heavily related to sexual practices and activity. This section is more in the realm of social relationships and dynamics. Power dynamics, how people of different power social levels should interact. For example, masters and slaves. I know that's not categories that in our culture in Canada we operate with, but again, we do have differences in authority levels or power structures. How neighbors should treat one another. And mixed in are also commands that are more about how to love God or how to act in loyalty to God. Now remember, again, that grid, what does this say to us about how to love God and love others? Now, not all of these commands may be clear to us today or actually even seem humane, as in like, why is God saying this? Or that just doesn't seem to be just or right. Again, we need to go back 3,500 years and do some understanding of the original context before we cast judgment. For example, slavery is allowed. And I know that's a big bugaboo for some people when they read this and go, well, how can a God who allows slavery be loving and just and all of these things? Again, we need to do a little bit more work and understand a little bit more the nuance of what's going on. Historical comparison, for example, to the culture surrounding Israel at this time actually shows a clear advance of the rights and status of those who were poor, those who were aliens, as in not Area 51 aliens, but people of a different culture, people, from a different nation, those with disabilities. Basically, how this section calls for God's people as a nation to treat those who would be in any society the most vulnerable, especially in ancient societies. The status and the rights that are given to those who are vulnerable are a vast advance. You go, well, why didn't God just bring it up to where we're at today? I just want to give a couple thoughts. One is, we live in a culture that has reaped the benefits of 3,500 years of the seeds that God placed here in Leviticus, of God's people, Old Covenant and then New Covenant, nation of Israel and the church. What is God saying here? What is God doing here? What is God calling for us to see about those that we're also to see are made in God's image? That's one thing we need to appreciate. The other is, if God would put our modern practices, at least in our culture, into that context, it may not work as well as we think. Now, one of the things, for example, this is more than just a clear advance. The raising of the status of female slaves, for example, or the practice of intentionally using your own daughter as a prostitute, which was a practice known in other cultures at that time. Here, what's being seen in this law is a raising of the status of women, indirectly in some ways, but also just planting seeds of change within the culture. I mean, if you're not allowed to use a woman for your own gain, without being required by law to give her a status that gives her protection, you can't just use and discard a woman. I mean, and if you're going to have to give her standing and status at your expense, for example, one of the laws, if you misuse a woman in a particular way, you now have to make her a wife. Well, now you're expected to care for her needs. You're expected to give shelter and protection, provision. So, you know, there's no such thing in Israelite culture as, by law at least, the one night stand or a use and discard. Note at the end of the chapter again, 3 times, I am the Lord your God, covenant language. These are not random laws. These are God giving guidelines, giving a tutor, so to speak, for how society shaped by his ways would work. If we're going to see all people as made in God's image, that does shift how you view those who are your servants. That does shift how you view the vulnerable. That does shift how you view those who are in need. That does shift how you view those who are of a different nationality or ethnicity. I mean, in the scriptures, it's, there is only one race. It's the human race. And granted, some of these laws just seem archaic and strange. But again, we've had over 3,000, we've had 3,500 years to be shaped by these. So here's a question for us. How are you, how am I, treating those who may be beneath you socially or above you? Or maybe it's not socially, it's economically. Or maybe it's you came from a different area. I mean, I know some people who don't like people from Collingwood, right? How do we treat people who are different than us? Those in need, the vulnerable. Is it shaped by our prejudice, our prejudgment of those people, or is it shaped by what God has, love your neighbor as yourself? This can be a really challenging thing. And so as we give God space to process this in us and reveal himself to us, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you. And today would you know his peace. God bless.